Wardley mapping consists of three basic things. First, it's a way of visualizing systems and how they change. Second, it's a specific body of research about how things tend to change under capitalism. And third, it's a strategic framework that leverages those patterns of change in order to create advantage. When Simon Wardley invented the method, his original intention was to rid the world of parasitic consultants. In other words, he wanted to empower anyone to be able to do strategy for themselves. Accordingly, all of Simon's methods are free. You can find a link to the book at learnwardleymapping.com, and the method itself is released Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike, which means anyone can use it and anyone can make it better. So without further delay, this is a Wardley map. At the top you can see a user, and then a system that is coming together to meet that user's needs. The system consists of parts as well as needs relationships, basically what is depending on what else. And then along the bottom you see an x-axis that describes how things are changing from left to right under the forces of supply and demand competition. Making a Wardley map is just one step in a larger framework that Simon calls the strategy cycle, which is based on Sun Tzu's The Art of War, as well as John Boyd's OODA loop. In this video, we're going to gloss over some of the details here and just focus on what the strategy cycle can enable for you. So when I teach teams about Wardley mapping, what I tend to focus on is this problem of how we all have different views of the same system, and they're often in conflict. But the problem is we don't know that they're in conflict, and so we're talking past each other all the time in an almost indirect way. The reason that happens is between observable reality and the actions we're taking, there are so many different places where we can distort the information and end up creating noise or incoherence with the other people around us. Now, Wardley mapping intervenes at the level of which data you select from reality, which data you make apparent to you, and it's this process of actively choosing what data gets selected that enables you to make better decisions and make explicit the conflict that you're experiencing in the workplace. So we're moving from implicit conflict where we're talking past each other to explicit conflict where we're actually creating common ground. The way I like to explain this is that when we work together, we're looking at this giant mess. And in order to make sense of it, we have to actually reduce the amount of ambiguity that we're dealing with at any given time. So we separate the mess into smaller parts, we give those smaller messes names, and we start to describe how those different messes are related so that when we propose an intervention or a change to the mess, we know which other parts of the mess will be affected. To make this concrete, I'd like you to find something to write with and something to write on. First, ask yourself, who out there is consuming the value that our organization creates? Pause the video, take as long as you need, and then write your answer at the top of the page. Now imagine the organization as a box that somehow magically produces this value. If you open up the top of the box and look inside, chances are there are going to be hundreds or thousands or even millions of different parts just all kind of working together to produce that value. If you think about the big ones that are just sort of at the top that are closest to the user, what are they? Make a quick list of just those basic parts. It can be functions, it can be part of your tech architecture, it can literally just be the jobs that people do every day in order to make this system work. Again, pause the video and make a list of a couple of these parts. Next, we want to understand how each of these parts is changing. Simon teaches us that everything evolves from left to right under the forces of supply and demand competition. So from stage 1 on the left all the way to stage 4 on the right. And as they change, they start to occur differently in the world. So there's a progression from genesis to custom build to product and rental services to commodity and utility services. Similarly, there's a progression from novel practices to emerging practices to good practices to best practice. Treat this like a simple categorization exercise where you're reverse engineering which stage your intuition thinks this part is in based on the table. Does it feel like it's in Genesis? Does it feel like it's more in custom built? Or is it more of a product? Or is it more of a commodity? As you make decisions, it may help to add an exponent just to annotate your decision for each part. Pause the video and give it your best shot. Now you have everything you need to make a Wardley map. We're going to take the parts on our list and translate it into the Wardley Map form. So find some empty space and follow along as we walk through the process. First, draw an x-axis along the bottom of the page. Then divide that x-axis into 4 sections and label the sections for each of the stages, 1 through 4. Then write the user that you identified, the person that is consuming the value your organization is creating, at the top above the map. This is where things get a little bit tricky. We need to translate the stage number into physical position from left to right. So for each of the parts, draw it in the stage that you identified it as being in. So if a part was in stage 1, you would draw it in the first section along the x-axis. Don't worry too much about vertical placement. We're just doing a minimum viable map. It's going to be wrong. That's going to be okay. You'll have plenty of time to make it better as you go through additional iterations of this process. The very last step is to draw relationships from the user to each of the parts. We're making a naive assumption here in our first map that every part directly provides value to the user. That's going to be wrong. We're going to make more complicated relationships later that more accurately model reality. But for now, this is just a quick way for us to start having the conversation that Wardley mapping as a strategic method enables us to have. Once you have a map, the question becomes what to do with it. Now there are 2 basic uses. One is as a communication tool, and the other is as a thinking tool. As a communication tool, what you can do is start to have more explicit conversations about creating common ground, so that you can drive out of the system the views of it that conflict between you and your coworkers and the people that are making decisions around you. As a thinking tool, I like to think of it as giving us the chance to consider 3 aspects of strategy. First, fitness. Can we even participate in the strategic game? Second is defense. Do we know how things are changing around us so that we can protect our position and continue to survive in the long run? Then offense. Can we take an active role in creating the futures that we want to create? Each of these aspects corresponds to a step in Simon's strategy cycle. So for example, fitness corresponds to our doctrinal principles, how we train and the values that we choose for our organization, while defense is more about being aware of the patterns of capitalism, the things that we don't really get a choice over. But then there's offense, what active roles we can take by deploying basic strategic plays that Simon describes in his book. We'll explore what all this looks like in the next videos, but for now take a moment to congratulate yourself on taking this first step in what could be a decades-long journey in strategic practice. You've made your first Wardley map.